Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. This is your brother Abdurrahman Bashir. Thank you for joining me for our another session talking about the month of Rabi-Al-Thani. Last week we spoke about whenever we talk about the month of Rabi'-Thani, one of the events that happened in the month of Rabi'-Thani was the expedition of Usamah ibn Zaid. And we're going to go ahead, cut to the chase, inshallah. And let's go ahead and start with the notes. So last week's lecture, I shared with you who was Usamah ibn Zaid radiallahu anhu. We talked a little bit about the Battle of Mu'tah, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam's final days, the expedition of Usamah ibn Zaid and Usamah ibn Zaid radiallahu anhu. So in last week's lecture, just as a summary and recap, I shared with you the position of the Arabian Peninsula amongst both of its neighboring empires, the Byzantine Empire and also the Sassanid Empire, also known as the Persian Empire. So the Arabian Peninsula was sandwiched in between both of these empires, and after the Treaty of Hudaybiyah, when the coast was clear for open travel, the Prophet ﷺ, he started to send emissaries, delegations, and ambassadors with the message of Islam, not only throughout Arabia, but the Prophet ﷺ also sent a group of 16 emissaries to the tribal areas that served as the border between the Arabian Peninsula and the south of Syria. Okay, so there were a whole bunch of tribes who were Arab in heritage but Christian in religious practices. Okay, they had some type of autonomy. And the Prophet ﷺ sent 16 emissaries in that area to invite them and to share and spread the message of Islam. The tribe leader, the leader of that tribe, of the Ghassan tribe, he killed all of those emissaries except for one. And even and that breach of code, it basically is a call for war. The Prophet ﷺ, to respond to this act of violating the honor code, the Prophet ﷺ sent Zayd ibn Haritha radiallahu anhu, along with his own cousin Ja'far ibn Abi Talib. He sent a group of Sahaba with 3 commanders to go and confront them. They were ambushed. All 3 of those commanders passed away. The Prophet ﷺ, they came back to Medina. The Prophet ﷺ received them back in Medina, and then the Prophet ﷺ. Then there was the Battle of Tabuk, and as I mentioned, we're going to talk about that next month, inshallah. Then near the end of the Prophet ﷺ's life, the Prophet ﷺ called for a group to be dispatched, an expedition, a battalion to be formed to send out to that same area and region that basically needed to pay for what they had done. So this brings me to part 2 of the lecture of the expedition of Usamah ibn Zaid. The person that Prophet ﷺ picked for this job to be the leader of this expedition was Usamah ibn Zaid radiallahu anhu, who was 18, barely 19 years old at that time. And at the end of last week's discussion, I shared with you how the Prophet ﷺ, even despite his illness and despite his ailment, the Prophet ﷺ, he gave his final formal address with a cloth wrapped around his head. He requested his family members to pour water on him to bring his fever down. The Prophet ﷺ got up, and after sharing some advice, the Prophet ﷺ, nipped this particular issue right in the butt, where people were talking. Now, depending on who was doing the talking. So if you talk about the hypocrites, they were trying to cause chaos and a ruckus amongst the Muslims. And if you talk about those who were not the hypocrites, well, it was their opinion that, hey, we shouldn't have this 18, 19-year-old leading us. We should have someone with more seniority, someone with more expertise, someone with more experience on the battleground. I mean, you're going to go butt heads with the Romans, okay? So the Prophet ﷺ addressed this issue, nipped this objection straight in the butt. And the Prophet ﷺ, basically said that, hey, if you are speaking up, if you're having reservations about my decision of appointing Usamah ibn Zaid as the leader of this expedition, well, that means you also had a problem with Zaid as well. And this is all going to make sense, inshallah, when we move forward in the discussion. I'm just giving you a recap of what I shared last week. The Prophet ﷺ very openly and very clearly, he stated that he is the right man for the job. Khaliq. He is the right man for the job, and he is the most beloved to me. Scholars of seerah explain that Usamah ibn Zaid was appointed at this task, and he was being sent to the same area where his own father was killed by the Roman forces. So sending a son to, avenge, not just to avenge, the atrocity and the aggression that they extended towards the Muslim, the emissaries, but also, hey, he's going to go avenge the death of his father. But that's not the only reason, okay? He wasn't only appointed there just because he was the son of the person who was made martyr and slayed by the Romans over there. And at the ending of last week's lecture, I expressed my intention that in order to truly understand where his standing was, we have to get to know Usamah radiallahu anhu. We should get to know who Zayd ibn HARITHAH, his father, was, and who his mother was. So I'm going to set up the stage for that, inshallah, in the first 10-15 minutes. And then we're going to go back to talking about the expedition of Usamah radiallahu anhu. A combination of last week's lecture and this week's lecture will basically put the entire picture in front of you. The entire setting and the stage is set up for you to get a good grasp and understanding of what exactly happened, what led to it, and what was the outcome. Because the end result of Usamah radiallahu anhu's expedition pretty much opened the door for the Roman conquest. So it was a big deal, okay? So now, before we talk about Usamah ibn Zaid, let's talk about the Ibn Zaid part of his name, and that is Zayd ibn Haritha radiallahu anhu. Zayd ibn Haritha was from the early converts to Islam. He was one of the household members of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And I'm just giving you a general overview. For majority of his of seerah, he was known as Zayd ibn Muhammad, Zayd, the son of Muhammad. Why? Not because he was the biological son of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but he was the adopted son of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. All right, how did he become the adopted son of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam? Well, the way the story starts is he belonged to the tribe of Banu Kalb. Okay, this is a tribe that's located between Syria and Iraq. He was alongside his mom visiting his mother's tribe, okay, when it was raided by another tribe. And what happens when one tribe raids another tribe? They take over, and everything that is there is theirs, okay? Everything and everyone that basically comes through, or they come across in a raid, belongs to in a battle, belongs to the victors. So as a result of that, Zayd found himself captive, okay? And he was sold off as a slave. Now this is pre-Islam. His family tried very hard to track him, but they were not successful. Zayd would try to find travelers from his Banu Kalb area to get the word out, to let his people know. So every time that opportunity came, he tried to forward the message through. And I'm not mentioning this in the notes, but how did he get the message across? Well, his parents, the family was known to be, the tribe actually was known for their poetry. So he would compose these couplets and poems that would give the family a hint of where he would be without, espousing any suspicion. Okay, so he tried very long. He tried to get the message across. Now, as he was a slave, okay, during his time as a slave, what happened? So, hold on, let me try to get rid of that toolbar right here so we get more. There you go. We have more real estate on the screen now. So, what happens during that time as he was a slave? He found himself being sold, and he was purchased by Hakim ibn Hizam. Now, Hakim ibn Hizam, at this point, he's not a Muslim. He is a pagan. He is the nephew of Khadija radiallahu anha. And he bought Zayd for 400 dirhams and gifted him to her. Okay. Now, Khadija radiallahu anha, when she got married to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, she gifted him to him. Okay. You get it now? So the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam receives Zayd as a gift from Khadija. Zayd was around 15 years old. And now Zayd pretty much basically is a part of the Prophet ﷺ's household. Okay. So, as the story unfolds, the Prophet ﷺ has his own daughters, has his own kids. And who else is in that house? Who else is a part of that household? Zayd ibn HARITHAH is also a part of that household. Now, after some time, once during Hajj season, he bumped into some of his tribe members and they recognized him. So they went back after Hajj and told his parents, told the family that, hey, we spotted Zayd. We have found Zayd and he lives in Makkah. So his father and his uncle, they come from Banu Kalb trying to rescue. And, their whole intention was, okay, you know what? Let's ransom him. Let's purchase him. Let's buy our son back. Now, when they got to the house, when they got to Makkah, they got word that, hey, he belongs to this house. Okay, so they go to the Prophet ﷺ. They offer to ransom him off for a handsome amount of money, but the Prophet ﷺ, he declined to accept that money. Why? He didn't want to sell Zayd. Well, here's how the story unfolds. Instead, the Prophet ﷺ calls Zayd and says, hey, Zayd, فأنا من قد علمت ورأيت صحبتي لك فاخترني أو اخترهما. Look, you know me, you have experienced the way that I take care of you and treat you. So I'm going to give you a choice. Either you choose them or you choose me. So Zayd, what does he say? Zayd, he says that as far as I'm concerned, there is no way I will choose anyone over you. You are like parents to me. Okay. So when the father and uncle heard Zayd say this, they're like, for reals? Wayhak, like for reals? Ya Zayd, atakhtaru al-ubudiyya ala al-hurriyya wa ala abika wa ammika wa ahli baytik. For reals? You are going to choose. Okay. You are going to opt into being a slave over freedom, over being with your dad, being with your uncle, being with your family, for reals? And what did Zayd say? Of course, I cannot. إني قد رأيت من هذا الرجل شيئا ما أنا بالذي أختار عليه أحدا أبدا. After seeing what I have seen from this person, I can never choose anyone over him ever. Okay? Now, this is basically how the conversation unfolded. Now, what happened after this? The Prophet ﷺ grabbed Zayd and took him in front of the Kaaba, and he announced his freedom. And that's how, freedom was announced. Everyone had to know when a person was let go from the bond of slavery. And then what happened? The Prophet ﷺ declared him. So not only did he grant him freedom, but the Prophet ﷺ also declared that I am adopting him. Okay? Ya man hadar. Everyone who's here, ishhadu anna Zaydan ibni arithuhu wa yarithuni. Bear witness, I am announcing that Zayd hereby is my son and we inherit from each other. So in other words, that's it. He's my son. So it was after this particular incident that now Zayd is known as Zayd ibn Muhammad. Okay, so you have Qasim ibn Muhammad, you have Tahir ibn Muhammad, now you have Zayd ibn Muhammad. He was known by that title, okay? And what happened to Zayd's father and uncle? Well, they were relieved that, hey, you know what? He wants to be happy here, we'll let him be happy here. And they left and they went back to where they came from. So this is the father of Zayd the father of Usamah ibn Zaid. This is how close he was to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Okay. Now, who was the mother of Usamah ibn Zaid? Her name is Ayman. Now, I have in the corner right there that little pink flyer, because I spoke in depth and in detail about Ayman radiallahu anha. There is another session that I do called Pearls of Sahabiyat. So if you want to go ahead and check on the channel, and you can dig into that and find out about her entire life. Okay, but just to give you a general overview, since we're tagging her here. Ayman radiallahu anha was the first caretaker and mother figure of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Okay, she belonged to Abdullah and was at the side of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam's mother during Abdullah's death. Narrations mention that Abdullah came across her from Abdul Muttalib. Okay, so Ayman belonged to Abdullah. And when Abdullah passed away, she was the one who was there to comfort and take care of Amina after Abdullah's death. She was also the one who was there during the Prophet ﷺ's birth. And at the age of 6, when the Prophet ﷺ was returning back from Yathrib, what turned into Medina later on, right before they came back on their way back from Medina to Mecca, Amina felt ill and she passed away. So Ayman is the one who was there. She was the third person. She was the one who was there, who basically buried Amina and brought the Prophet ﷺ, at that time the child Muhammad ﷺ back to Mecca, and she constantly stayed by his side, raising the Prophet ﷺ. Now, she has the distinction of being the one who knew the Prophet ﷺ the longest. Okay, she was there before he was born, and she lived after the Prophet ﷺ's death. And it is also mentioned in narrations that the Prophet ﷺ would address her as "O mother." Okay, so this is who Zayd ibn Harithah is. This is who Ayman is. Ayman. So where does Usamah come into the picture? Well, Zayd marries Ayman. So Ayman radiallahu anha, before we get into her marriage with Zayd, Ayman, by the way, was granted her freedom after the Prophet ﷺ's marriage to Khadija. But she still remained as a part of the household. The Prophet ﷺ took care of her. She got married to a person by the name of Ubayd ibn Zayd. He happened to be from Yathrib. She had actually moved to Yathrib before it became Medina. He passed away. When he passed away, she came back to the Prophet ﷺ's household. But now, as a result of that marriage, she had a son named Ayman, which made her Ayman. Okay? So time unfolds, time passes by. The Prophet ﷺ, Islam comes around. Ayman is from amongst the early converts. Zayd ibn Harithah is also from amongst the early converts. I mean, they were the household of the Prophet ﷺ, so they all came on board. Okay, so after some time, the Prophet ﷺ made a statement, and he said, "Man sarrahu an yatazawwaj imra'atan min ahli al-jannah falyatazawwaj Ayman." Whoever wants to marry a person from Jannah should marry and propose to Ayman. So guess what? In response to this, Zayd ibn Harithah radiallahu anhu proposed to Ayman for marriage. Okay, and it was a result of that union that brought this Usamah ibn Zaid radiallahu anhu. Which now the next topic, Usamah ibn Zaid radiallahu anhu. Who was Usamah ibn Zaid? Well, he was the son of Zayd and Ayman radiallahu anhuma. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam loved him just as he loved Zayd. Okay, and subhanallah, Zayd was known as Hibbu Rasulillah. Hib means mahbub, means beloved. So Zayd was known as the beloved of the Prophet. So Usamah, he was loved by the Prophet ﷺ so much that he also became known as the beloved. So you have two beloveds, hence the title Hib al-Hib Ibn al-Hib, the beloved son of the beloved. Okay, now he was 7 years. He was born 7 years before migration. So when the Prophet ﷺ passed away, that puts him around 18, 19-ish. Okay, so Usamah is born 7 years before the migration. Okay, so he throughout his entire life, his Medina experience was the years of 8 to 18. Okay, very important years of development, very important years of growing and tarbiyah and upbringing. Okay, now he wasn't just close to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, like, you know, as far as love is concerned, but even in proximity. Usamah ibn Zaid, he had the fortune of being around the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He had that access. Okay, he had that access to go in and out of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam's house as he pleased. Now, when we talk about Usamah radiallahu anhu, remember, I'm trying to help us understand the position of Usamah in the eyes of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in the heart of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, which will help us better understand what the deal was behind, you know, designated Usamah ibn Zaid to lead the expedition, the very important expedition off to the Romans. Okay, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, it is mentioned that he would grab Usamah and Hassan, and he would say, Allahumma ahibbahuma fa inni uhibbuhuma. Oh Allah, love them as I love them. Okay, now when we talk about Usamah and Hassan, right, where Hussein was, you know, by the time of this, Hussein was probably born later, but at the time, Usamah radiallahu, the age difference between Usamah and Hassan was about 10 years. So Usamah was 10 years older than Hassan radiallahu anhu. So just imagine this picture, right? He's got a 10-year-old, or or however old Usamah was, and Hassan radiallahu anhu, and he's saying that he's telling Allah, oh Allah, love these kids because I love them. Okay, so subhanallah, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam's expression of love for his children. This is very, very important. You know, I want to pause over here, and, you know, for whoever's watching and whoever's listening, it's very important to express our love for our children. Okay, I love you, I miss you. It's very important, and this is something that is from the Sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, as we see here. Okay, now Aisha radiallahu anha mentions in a narration, and she says that no one is allowed to have any type of beef, okay, or hatred with Usamah. Why? Because she heard the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "Man kana yuhibbullah wa rasulah falyuhib Usamah." If you love God, if you love His Prophet, then you must love Usamah. Okay, so the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam let it known. You know, he put it out there. He let everyone know what his position was in regards to Usamah radiallahu anhu. Okay, now Aisha radiallahu anha. Okay, another thing about let me leave this one out right here. Okay, so another thing that indicates that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, how much he loved Usamah, is Aisha radiallahu anha says that Usamah once stumbled at the threshold of the door and cut his face. Okay, this hadith is in Ibn Majah. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "Move the blood from him," but I was repulsed by that. You know, she saw the blood, and you know, she hesitated, or she couldn't respond right away. So the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he himself started to remove the blood. The riwayah mentions that he started to suck the blood off of him and remove it from his face. And he made a statement that, oh, if Usamah was a girl, I would have adorned him and dressed him until I married him off. Like, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam loved Usamah so much, you know, that, you know, I mean, girls are girls and boys are boys. Okay, so when you talk about, you know, little girls, you dress them up, you adorn them, they wear jewelry. Boys is just clothes. You know what I mean? Boys, we don't have the luxury of accessories. So the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that, you know, if he was a girl, I would accessorize him, I would adorn him and dress him until I married him off. So this just shows, okay, the compassion that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam had for Usamah radiallahu anhu. In another hadith, Usamah Ibn Zaid radiallahu anhu mentions that once Ali radiallahu anhu said, "Ya Rasulullah, ayyu ahlika ahabbu ilayk? Who from your family is most beloved to you?" She said, "Fatima, my girl, my daughter Fatima, of course." So then Ali radiallahu anhu says, "Innama as'aluka 'anil rijal." I'm asking about the guys. So he said that man an'ama Allahu wa an'amta alayhi Usamah ibn Zaid, that the one who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has gifted and that reference is going to Usamah ibn Zaid radiallahu anhu, and then he says, then who? Then the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, okay, then you. Aisha radiallahu anha says that once the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam wanted to wipe the running nose of Usama, Aisha said, hey, leave it to me, I'll take care of it. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, Ya Aisha, ahabbihi fa inni uhibbuhu, show him love because I love this kid. All right. So this shows you how near and dear, okay, Usama radiallahu anhu was to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Okay, Usamah ibn Zaid. There are some narrations that. So let's talk about some of the distinctions that Usama radiallahu anhu had. Usamah ibn Zaid radiallahu anhu had the distinction of being on the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam's ride as he was entering Mecca. So the very famous story of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, with displaying the utmost humility, entering Makkah, Fath is going on, all the Quraysh are have backed off, and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is entering Makkah. That scene, that moment, who is a part of that picture? Who is a part of that moment? Usamah ibn Zayd is a part of that moment. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam asks for the keys of the Kaaba. Uthman ibn Talha, whose family, who was in charge of the key at that time, okay, he presents the key. The door is opened. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Bilal radiallahu anhu, entered the Kaaba. And who else was a part of that picture? Usamah ibn Zayd radiallahu anhu. During the final Hajj of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was delayed in one of the places during Hajj. Why was that delayed? Because he was waiting for Usamah ibn Zayd radiallahu anhu. So the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam really loved Usamah ibn Zayd. So that gives you an idea of where this person stands in the eyes of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Okay, so it's not just about, all right, he was the son of Zayd, so let's send the son to avenge the death of the father. No, this person had grooming from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam at the most important years and stages of his life. I mean, he grew up as a child. He spent his teens around the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So the way the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was, I mean, everything that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam's akhlaq, his intelligence, definitely rubbed off Usamah ibn Zayd radiallahu anhu. And this is why the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said he is the man for the job. Okay, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in his illness, in his ailment, got up and made it clear that there's no right to object. This is the person for the job, and he's going to get this job done. Okay, now back to the expedition. What happened? So as I mentioned last week, the expedition of Usamah, this mission of Usamah, was the last mission instructed by the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam before he passed away. However, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam passed away as the entire group, as this, as the battalion was waiting outside of Medina in prep. Okay, so the Prophet ﷺ made the announcement. He encouraged the Sahaba. Now there's 3,000 people who are gathered right outside of Medina. They're getting all of their provisions together. All the prep that is going on. They're not going to do it right there in the middle of the city. They're going to go on the outskirts of the city. They're going to get all the cattle, all the animals, all the supplies, all the people, all the camp equipment, all the tents. Everything is being organized at one place right outside, a stone's throw outside of Medina. Okay. As all of this is going on, the Prophet ﷺ passes away. Okay, the Prophet ﷺ passes away, and we know the hoopla that unfolded. It was like, in the words of Anas ibn Malik radiallahu anhu, the darkest day in Medina. And without going into too many details of that, because I talked about that in Rabi'-Al-Awwal in that discussion in detail. So now, the expedition of Usamah ibn Zayd is up in the air. Okay, what do we do? What do we do? Okay, so at the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he instructed that, hey, we're going to Rome. Who's taking us? Usamah ibn Zayd is taking y'all. So that issue was cleared. There's also mentioned in narration that when the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was really ill, so even though all of the troops were outside of Medina, they still had the liberty to come back and forth to Medina. So, they would come and visit the Prophet. They would pray at the Prophet's masjid. Usamah radiallahu anhu made someone in charge. He also came back to Medina. They were visiting the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, throughout his entire final days. Okay, Usamah ibn Zaid once entered into the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam's presence. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam did not have the strength to talk to him, speak to him. So the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam raised his hands up in the air and he signaled towards Usamah. He put his hands on Usamah, which Usamah radiallahu anhu took as a sign, that as an indication that he's making dua for me. Okay, so all of this was going on. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam passes away. Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, now he is nominated and declared the next leader. Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu takes the reins. Now people start talking again. And what talk is going on this time? Well, the talk that is going on right now is, so if we delve into the seerah of Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, what unfolded after the death of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam? Many tribes around Arabia, they ditched their loyalties to Islam. They ditched their allegiance. They did not extend their loyalty and allegiance to Abu Bakr, because according to them, hey, we were loyal to the Prophet, and now that the Prophet is gone, our loyalty is out the window as well. Our allegiance is out the window as well. This is known as the widespread riddah that happened, the apostasy, where that's it. Everyone just started, a lot of people, a lot of tribes, the leaders, they decided, you know what? We're going to ditch Islam. So they were dealing with that situation. So now everyone you had on your side is now flipping and going on the other side of the fence. And the Prophet ﷺ has passed away. Everyone is, dealing with that shock in Medina, okay, literally shock. And now you have a force of 3,000 like soldiers, like, able-bodied people, ready to confront. They're sitting outside of Medina. They got to go to Rome. The Prophet ﷺ passed away. People are flipping their loyalties and their allegiance. That puts Medina at threat, okay? That is going to put Medina at threat. So now what? Now the discussion is going on that, hey, we shouldn't send this expedition altogether. Let's not send it. Let's not send it. Let's not send it. Oh my God, there was this back and forth. And Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, there were two meetings that were convened amongst the Sahaba. And the Sahaba were like, you know what? We don't want to leave you alone with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam's household and his wives and all of the elderly. We're not going to leave Medina vulnerable like this, especially with the way the landscape flipped. We should not send. And their opinion was not, God forbid, to butt heads with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam's wish, or to disobey the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam's instructions and orders. It was based on the situation that, hey, you know what? Maybe we should take a rain check on this one. So there was some back and forth, and then Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu. It is mentioned that Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, he said, and I'm gonna just quote Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, that Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu said that if I was worried, if the animals, if wild animals would take me, okay, and they would drag me outside of Medina, I will still not go against the wish of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, he made it very clear that, look, this group is going to go. They are going to go to Rome. This was the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam's decision. Who am I to veto the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam? The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam's decision. So Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, he went ahead and he pushed ahead. He's like, no, this is going to happen. And so Usamah radiallahu anhu. Now there was one thing that did happen, however, okay? That Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, he requested Usamah ibn Zaid to leave. Like, can you allow Umar to stay back with me? I need Umar, okay? I'm fine with everyone going. You all go, but just leave Umar behind for me. And Usamah ibn Zaid radiallahu anhu decided to leave. Let Umar stay back. Now, look at this. The Khalifa now, Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, who has so many years on top of Usama, right? Who has so much seniority, so much virtue, but subhanallah, he is asking Usama that, hey, can you leave Umar behind? And Usama says, yes, I will leave Umar behind. Now, Usama wasn't stuck up either, like, oh no, I'm taking him. How you did? No, he was willing to work with it, and he worked with it. Now, Usamah ibn Zaid radiallahu anhu, he takes this force up to the Roman border, and they fight, they confront with the tribes, and they are victorious. And they came back with a lot of spoils of war, a lot of wealth, and this confrontation, okay, the expedition of Usama butting heads with the Ghassan tribes at the border basically opened the doors, okay? It opened the doors to conquest in the Byzantine Empire, okay? It is mentioned in the riwayat, right? I mean, look at the impression it leaves. It is mentioned in narrations that they had a very harsh confrontation. They were victorious, and then Heraclius, who was the emperor of the Byzantines at that time, Heraclius, okay, he received two messages, and both of these messages came at the same time. What was the first message? That, hey, the Arab prophet passed away, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Okay, so he gets that message. What's the other message? The Arab forces were knocking at our door. Okay, so it forced Heraclius to say, "Ma balu haula yamutu sahibuhum wa an agharu ala ardina." Like, what is up with these people? Their prophet just died and they're knocking at our doors. I mean, so this basically left an impression. Okay, it left an impression to the Byzantines that, hey, we mean business, okay? And the passing of the prophet is not going to, that does not mean we are going to be susceptible to your aggression, or we're going to accept your aggression, or we're going to stand for it anymore. This is basically the message that went out. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and again, who comes? The son of the one you killed has come. So basically, the message that was sent alongside of spreading the message of Islam and Tawheed was, hey, we mean business. All right. So yeah, the Islam basically showed that it was a force to be reckoned with, and just let us do our thing. Okay, let us do our worship. Don't come in our way. And basically, that's the impression that it gave. Now, Usama radiallahu anhu, after this, he spent most of his life away from the public spotlight. He remained apolitical during all of the civil war and civil unrest that unfolded in Islamic history. Now, he was not just beloved of the Prophet while the Prophet was alive, but he held a lot of respect. He was held in high esteem and respect by the Sahaba even afterwards. Okay, Umar radiallahu anhu, is mentioned about him that when he would meet Usamah ibn Zaid, he would say, "Assalamu alaikum ya Amir." Okay, he would call him, he would address him as the Ya ayyuhal Amir. Oh Amir, Assalamu alaikum Amir Saab. Amir Saab, Assalamu alaikum. Okay. And he was like, why are you calling me Amir? He's like, because you are made the Amir. You are the one in command, okay, of the expedition when the Prophet ﷺ passed away. And Umar radiallahu anhu, he established this system of giving stipends and allowances to the seniors, for their service, for all of their khidmah, so that they can live in peace, they can live in comfort. And then the other people who are newly accepting Islam, they can sit down and learn from them and benefit from them, instead of them just being busy, working all day. So his stipend was more than his own sons. Okay. And Abdullah ibn Umar radiallahu anhu, he once asked his dad, he's like, I've participated in more battles and I have been around longer, etc., and you're giving him more than me. So he said that, listen, he was huwa ahabbu ila Rasulillahi sallallahu alaihi wasallam لأن أباه كان أحب إلى رسول الله من أبيك وهو أحب إلى رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. He was more beloved to the Prophet than you, and his daddy was more beloved to the Prophet ﷺ than me. Okay, so this gives you a little idea of what the and I have some other details over here, but we're gonna call it a night, inshallah. Yeah, so this gives you an idea of the Jaysh of Usamah radiallahu an. So folks, in this lecture, we have a better understanding of why it was Usamah. And what was the hikmah and wisdom behind Usamah, and what was the outcome of this Jaysh? Why was it so important? And the fact that Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, he insisted that, hey, if this is what the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, WWMD, what would Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam do? Hey, he said, go. Who am I to be the one to stop that from happening? So this shows a lot about Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, Usamah ibn Zaid radiallahu anhu, and all of the wonderful personalities and people who are called the Sahaba radiallahu anhum wa radu an, who were a part of the seerah and who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala utilized to make all of this possible. Jazakumullah khair, folks. Next time we meet, we are going to be in the month of Jumad al-Ula, okay? So right at the border of Rabi-Al-Thani, right on the line. So we're going to talk a little bit about Jumad al-Ula next month. What does Jumad al-Ula mean? What happened in that month? And we're going to reflect from there. Jazakumullah khair, folks. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.